Hello, Giants fans, and welcome to the Valentine's Views podcast. I'm your host, Ed Valentine of Big Blue View, and I'm joined today by Big Blue View contributor Nick Falato as we react to day one of Giants free agency, the what is commonly called the negotiating window, but where anyone who watches the NFL and understands it knows that pretty much all the big stuff happens in day one and day two before the actual signing period starts. So we'll talk about what the Giants did. Nick, how you doing?
I'm doing well, Ed. Thank you for having me. And it's also good just that the New York Giants address the offensive line in somewhat of a capacity here. So I'm excited to dive into that today.
Well, and I'm excited by my timing today, Nick, because you and Chris Flum did a show today. And you silly people, you recorded a show before the Giants actually made any news, before they made the moves that we found out about, Monday evening on the offensive line. So I get to have you come on and talk about that.
Yeah, the timing wasn't great for Chris and I, but we still went over a bunch of the, I guess you could say, big news of the day. The Jacksonville Jags just spending Evan Ingram, going down to Duval, and a lot of other things that we covered on this show just from stuff happening around the league.
Yeah, so let's talk about the Giants and the offensive line. Added Mark Glowinski, former Indianapolis Colts guard, 3-year, $20 million contract is what's been reported, $11 million guaranteed. Followed that up with what really has been the expected signing of former Buffalo Bills offensive lineman John Feliciano, reportedly to play center. Now, my gut reaction is that I like this very much. Neither one of these guys are great NFL players, but they're both competent, capable NFL veterans who can help the Giants in 2022, who give them options, and who can help them as Joe Shane tries to navigate a really tricky cap situation, and building a better future for the Giants. So I feel good about these two signings, even though they're not by any stretch of the imagination top tier NFL offensive linemen.
And the Giants, as we all unfortunately know, they were in no position to go after the Brendan Sheriffs of the world. They had to kind of find quality veteran presences that can kind of step in and start for the New York Giants in this 2022. And I felt like they did that. They did exactly that. This is what we expected. I mean, John Feliciano, Darrell Williams was released earlier. We had a post on Big Blue View about which one would you prefer. And Darrell Williams, I think, would be the one that I would prefer. But he's going to come at a much higher cost. Feliciano can step in, and I think he can be a solid or adequate to solid starting center for the Giants as long as he's recovered from the injury, which he was, because he did return to the Bills late in the season. And then Glowinski was somebody that I wasn't certain if the Giants were going to be able to afford. I've watched a tape. So 1.5 games of his, I watched the Rams game, which was rough from pass protection, but he was going up against Aaron Donald a lot of the time. And then I watched the Ravens game, at least most of the Ravens game. I got to finish it up. And from what I've seen so far, he's a solid run blocker, I'd say. I think he's adequate in pass protection, better run blocker than he is in pass protection, if I'm going to be honest. I feel like he fires off the ball, establishes solid leverage, but as the play wears on, like a lot of players, his pad level tends to rise just a little bit, and that was exploited against quicker pass rushers. But I think he's going to step in here, and he's an automatic upgrade over any interior offensive lineman that the Giants had last year. Now, Nick Gates, I would say, is one that could definitely be argued, but he was only there for a game and a drive or 2 drives last year, unfortunately. So I really like the addition of Glowinski. The price isn't too exorbitant, and I think he's one of those players that I hoped that the Giants would go after and get. I don't think he's this guy who's going to absolutely change the offensive line in the sense that he's a true difference maker, but he is a professional. He is a starter, right. And that's what the Giants need.
And he's a guy that gives you the opportunity to, as the Giants look toward the draft, it's really It's 3 years, $20 million. It's the way those contracts work in the NFL. It's really a 2-year deal. It gives the Giants the opportunity to go into the draft, maybe look at one of the offensive tackles, in the top 10, and maybe go into the middle or lower parts of the draft and find a developmental guard, somebody that they can bring in maybe and develop to take over in a year or two. And I kind of feel the same way about Feliciano. We've been expecting Feliciano, and I didn't really think about Feliciano as a center until earlier in the day on Monday when I was doing some research and I discovered that he does have a decent amount of center experience. He played more than 200 snaps there for Buffalo in 2020. He's played 300 and some odd snaps at center during his career. And really, he gives the Giants time. He gives them flexibility. We don't know what's going to happen with Nick Gates. I have my doubts that Gates is going to play at all in 2022. And if he does, it's certainly not going to be at the beginning of the season. So Feliciano gives them at least an adequate center until Gates is ready, or until a developmental center that they might draft in the middle of the draft might be ready to take over. So again, sort of buying time, buying at a low cost, buying competent players that are upgrades from what they had.
And both of those players fit that bill with Feliciano and Glowinski. They're both competent players that are upgrades. And then you also got to look at the move that they made with the kid from the Falcons, Gano. He's a player that doesn't have the experience that these two players have, but I feel like he has a little bit more upside because he is younger and he's a pretty good athlete, but he's also somebody the Giants aren't going to have to rely on. So you're just bringing players into your building and having them compete. And that's all we really ever wanted. We wanted true competition, nobody being grandfathered in, and then have roles that are going to actually be earned. Now, I think the Giants will invest in the offensive line in the draft at some point. It's not a groundbreaking statement, but if it is later, that person isn't going to have to be thrust into action. He can wait behind the Felicianos or the Glowinskis or the Ganos of the world. So I'm really appreciating what Joe Schoen is doing right now for the New York Giants. It's not flashy, but I feel like it's savvy and I feel like it's prudent.
Well, it's exactly what we expected because we knew that he wasn't going to be able to, and you said it at the top of the show, we knew he wasn't going to be able to shop at the top of the market. We knew he wasn't going to be able to go after Brandon Sheriff. We knew he wasn't going to be able to go out and look at the top offensive tackles. So he's finding players that can help, while he builds out the roster the best he can through the draft, and while he straightens out the cap mess that the Giants are in. And you talked about Matt Gano, and I look at it this way. I still would bang the table for Evan Neal or Ike Ekwonu at 5. If both of those guys are gone, I'm banging the table all day long for Sauce Gardner. If we're sitting at 7 and Charles Cross or Trevor Penning is there, when we did the 7 for 7 the other day, I didn't put those guys on my list, but the more I look at Cross and the more I think about it, I might put Cross on my 7. But Cross is a guy, if you draft him, there's going to be a learning curve, moving left to right, playing out of a 3-point stance on occasion, doing more run blocking. And a guy like Matt Gano is a signing that might give them a chance to allow Cross to develop.
Yeah, and I think that's another excellent point. Cross, I feel like a lot of Giant fans are just writing him off. I don't want to take the third best tackle, but if the third best tackle is still graded higher than players at other positions, why would you not entertain that? So I'm about entertaining Charles Cross. I don't know if I would want to go that direction or feel forced to go that direction if a Kayvon Thibodeau was around or a Sauce Gardner. But I also think the Giants are in an interesting position as well at 5-7, with Carolina kind of splitting the difference between them, because Carolina last year, they drafted J.C. Horn, and they were criticized for it because they passed on some really good quarterback prospects. And then they traded for C.J. Henderson, who was a top 10 pick 2 years ago, another cornerback. So would they go cornerback again in the top 10? I'm not sure. So would the Giants weigh that in if they're sitting there at 5 and they're like, Kayvon Thibodeau's around, we like him, we like maybe even a Charles Cross. I think Sauce Gardner is going to be available for us at 7 if we don't want to trade back, because I don't believe it's in Carolina's best interest to add a cornerback, and there's other value that they might be interested in.
Sure. It's all about options, and heading into the draft is all about not being in a situation where you absolutely have to do something. And to his credit, with the offensive line moves so far, Joe Schoen is lessening the burden, I guess you want to say, is lessening the burden for absolutely having to force a pick. I mean, he's got to add offensive line talent. There's no doubt about that. But as you said, if they're not 100% sold on Charles Cross or on Trevor Penning as a top 10 worthy pick, they don't have to do that. They could pick a Kayvon Thibodeau, who's another guy that I love, or they can trade down and add some extra capital. So yeah, but this is what you hoped that Joe Schoen would do.
It's exactly what we hoped Joe Schoen would do, and he's doing it right now. And he said that this isn't a throwaway year. He wants to attempt to compete. And I think we can all be realists here and realize that the Giants aren't necessarily in a position to compete right now as currently constructed. But the steps that have been taken in the last couple of weeks, specifically today, I feel like at least gives them an opportunity to compete, especially in the NFC. The NFC, yeah, they got Tom Brady back, which is awesome for them. But other than that, you have the Packers, you have the Rams, 49ers you don't want to write off. But it's not that much of it's not too crazy to think a 7th seed could be achieved from one of these teams that were really bad in 2021 if everything fell in the right direction. Now, I'm not saying the Giants are going to make the playoffs or anything like that, but I'm just saying it's not the AFC, the NFC.
When I talked to Mike Tannenbaum, former GM of the Jets, the other day, he said he was part of a Jets team in, I think it was 1997, that the year he was hired, the previous year they had gone 1-15, and he was hired when Bill Parcells came in. And that first year they went 9-7. And the second year they were in the AFC Championship game. And Mike also pointed out, and Giants fans are going to hate this, but Mike also pointed out the 2021 Philadelphia Eagles, who were 4-11-1 2 years ago. And last year, what were they, 9-8 and made the playoffs?
Yeah.
So it can be done. I mean, let's put it this way. Let's forget playoffs. Considering where the Giants have been, 5 straight double-digit losing seasons, if you can win 8 or 9 games, playoffs or no playoffs, if you can win 8 or 9 games, doesn't that feel good? Doesn't that feel like progress? Doesn't that feel like competent football for a change, and maybe that you're moving in the right direction? I think that would be outstanding for the Giants.
Actually competing in December, that would be
Yes.
great. And yeah, they competed in 2020, but that was one of the weakest divisions we've ever seen.
That doesn't really count.
Exactly. Hey, Ed, did Mike talk about Peyton Manning's decision to not go into the draft after that 1-15 season?
No, he didn't. That's selective memory, maybe.
Maybe. But yeah, so I mean, I feel like we're on the right path right now. And
yeah,
as we all knew,
I thought it was great that Joe Schoen was able to get Sterling Shepard and Blake Martinez to come back. And you hit on it. He doesn't want to throw the 2022 season away. They're trying to, and it comes back to Daniel Jones. They're trying to judge a quarterback. They're trying to figure out, and they have 1 year to do it. They're trying to figure out if they can go forward after 2022 with Daniel Jones. And you can't do that if you put a horrible team around him. That's what he dealt with in 2021. He dealt with no supporting cast. Giants tried, but because of injuries and and everything else that was going on with the Giants, it didn't work. 2 years ago, it didn't work either because he just had nothing. So you can't judge a quarterback if you don't put anything for him to work with around him. And I think they know that.
They definitely know that. But I'm also interested with Daniel Jones. Would the Giants really, even if he does have a really good season for Daniel Jones, now we're not talking about Josh Allen, they would have to pay this guy. Paying a quarterback it's a lot of money, and the rookie quarterback window is a real thing. So I'm like looking at Daniel Jones, like he needs to do everything correctly. I feel like to stick here, unless he's just another 1 year type of deal. Now with Daniel Jones and these young quarterbacks, I kind of feel like he might just be like the perfect bridge quarterback right now.
You
He's
can
just the perfect
always
bridge to whoever's going to be here next.
you can always, even if they don't want to go forward with him for the next 5 or 6 years, you could always franchise tag him next year. And it's a lot of money, but it's not $35 million like you're paying Kirk Cousins. It's which is insane money for Kirk Cousins. But you could always franchise tag him and still draft a quarterback to develop behind him and then move on after that. I suppose that's one way to do it. But yeah, who knows what's going to happen with Jones, but if they're going to give him a fair shot, you can't rip apart the roster and expect him to to look like a Pro Bowler.
No, absolutely. It would be very unfair to the kid. And the kid hasn't really had the best shake since coming into the NFL. But Ed, so not to change subjects completely, but Chris and I on the show that dropped previously, everyone go download and listen. We were talking about how
nice
Hassan
promo,
Reddick,
by the way. Nice little promo. Good job.
Got it, man. I got it. We were talking about how Hassan Reddick is now in the NFC East and how that's might not be great for the New York Giants because that guy just seems to turn it on when he plays against the Giants.
Yeah, Hassan Reddick's a guy that I would have loved to have seen be a Giant in 2021. I would have loved to have seen that. I'm not really sure why the Giants chose, not to go in that direction, but I really don't want to go down the path of wondering why Dave Gettleman did much of anything. So, but yeah, I really thought that Reddick was a guy that the Giants could have gone after. I mean, because of his local ties to New Jersey, because of the position that he plays, I thought he would have been a great fit for the Giants. He probably still is a great fit for the Giants, but like a lot of other guys on the market, a lot of guys that signed today, a lot of guys that are going to sign going forward, the Giants just don't have that kind of money to play with. And I don't want to say take your medicine at this point, but you can't play in the ballpark of the kind of money that Hassan Reddick and players like him are going to cost.
Oh, absolutely not. They were in no position for that. It just sucks that the Eagles have him, and now the Giants got to face him twice a year because I don't want to see 5-6 sacks again.
It seems like the Eagles, for whatever reason, always have about 8 zillion guys that can rush the passer.
Yeah, it definitely does. Even like they got Ryan Kerrigan last year from Washington, who was over the hill and quietly one of the more surprising, almost Hall of Fame resumes. Like I stumbled across Ryan Kerrigan's resume not long ago, and I was like, dude, this guy could possibly be a Hall of Famer. And nobody even thinks of him as like that great of a player during his time. It was like, but like the guy has so many sacks. He was on their team last year. I don't know if he did much, but the Eagles, they stockpile, and they got Josh Sweat, kid they drafted, I think, in the 4th round out of Florida State a few years back. He was a really good player, but was really injured in college, and he's starting to really come into his own as well.
So, Nick, I want to ask you, obviously, I tried to tell people for days that the Mitchell Trubisky hysteria, Mitchell Trubisky, hype train, to the Giants that thing had flown off the track and was just, it was crazy. But I tried to tell people it wasn't going to happen. It wasn't realistic. Maybe the Giants would have loved to have had Trubisky, for a year for $3 or $4 million, but he just got 2 years, 14 million and change from Pittsburgh, with the possibility of what I saw reported that deal could pay him as much as $27 million over 2 years. No chance the Giants were ever going to be able to compete with that. But the Giants still do need a backup quarterback. And I mean, for who are the guys that you think might be the right fits? We're probably talking about the Jacoby Brissetts of the world, maybe the Trevor Simeons of the world. But who are the 3 or 4 guys that you might really like to see the Giants go after?
So it would all come down to money, but I think we can all agree that the Giants need to invest in that second quarterback. The Mike Glennon experiment, that was a disaster. I thought Colt McCoy was better than what he was probably given credit for, but he can't really stretch the field vertically. But in terms of mentally, he's going to be able to set everything at the line of scrimmage and know what the defense is going to do and get his offensive players on the same page, which is a very underrated part of playing quarterback in the National Football League. But I'm looking around, I see Tyrod Taylor's name. I think that would be an interesting one. My issue with him is he's injured a lot, but he's an exciting player who has athletic ability. So I don't feel like you would have to change the offense too much if Daniel Jones ever gets injured. Another player that I've seen was a free agent was Case Keenum. And I'm not sure if he has been signed in the last couple hours. If he has, my bad. But I feel like Case Keenum is always one of those backups that you just want on your team when your quarterback is either injury prone or or struggling, like Baker Mayfield was both last year, because he's competent enough to step in and run an offense for you. He's smart, like Colt McCoy, like we were talking about, and he isn't insufficient in terms of his arm strength, his ability to push the ball vertically. He doesn't have a huge arm, but he can move the football for you. So I think Case Keenum is another name that I like. I just don't know what his market value is, and if the Giants can realistically allocate whatever his market value is towards him. I'm not really 100% sure on the money side of that. But those are 2 names that I like. I'm not opposed to Jacoby Brissett either. He has a really large arm and can stretch the field vertically, and supposedly everyone loves him everywhere he's been, in New England, in Indianapolis. They all love Jacoby Brissett. So he's another name that I'm not, and in Miami, another name that I'm not really opposed to be honest.
All right. And another thing that I think we need to talk about, sort of under the radar, smaller thing that the Giants did on Monday. They brought back CJ Board, who's a guy that I'm happy they brought him back. Really good special teams player, both in coverage and as a return option, possibility as a reserve, extra wide receiver when you need a fill in when somebody's hurt. And they also signed Robert Foster, who's a really under the radar player. But the intriguing thing about Foster is that the one good NFL season he had was for Brian Daboll in Buffalo, also played for Daboll in Alabama. Neither one of these are real impact, wide receiver. They don't change the wide receiver room. But my thought was, we know that the Giants still have cap issues. We know that sooner or later they probably have to move on from James Bradbury. They might have done enough where they can hold off until the draft, depending on how much they want to do in free agency. But when I think of the 2 wide receiver moves that the Giants made on Monday, I wonder if the Giants are going to go forward with Darius Slayton, or if they're going to look to cut or trade him and take the $2.5 million cap savings. And and just go in a different direction. Thoughts on Slayton's possible future with the Giants?
Well, Darius Slayton his career arc has been heading downwards since 2019, unfortunately. Showed a lot of promise as a 5th-round pick coming out of Auburn. Looked like a hit, but he's struggled with inconsistent hands for the last 2 years. And CJ Board has stepped on the field, and I felt like looked like he belonged. Now, not somebody that you would necessarily want to be in 11 personnel sets, but if someone gets injured, you can put him in there. I can see it happening, especially because we know that the Giants have a number in mind. 40 million has been floated out there that they want to get to. I don't know if they're going to realistically be able to get to that if they don't do something about Saquon. And then there's obviously James Bradberry, like you said. So I'm not fully on board with the Giants definitely should move on from Darius Slayton. I do think there is talent there, but this kid is in his last year. He has struggled a lot, and adding Robert Foster is interesting. Now, Robert Foster was with Dable for 2 years, I believe, in Buffalo, and then he was at Alabama with him as well. He's a similar type of player in the sense that he can stretch the field vertically. He's fast. So it could be that, or it could just be we're bringing guys that I'm familiar with and guys, we're going to have them compete. We all know one thing about football. It's money. It all comes down to money at the end of the day. And I look at Darius Slayton, like I said, I don't like, I like him, but is he a true difference maker on this team? Not really. No. So if you can save that $2.5 million, it could be something that's going to happen. But I want to ask you, is that a post-June thing, or is that a pre-June thing before the draft type of move?
That would be pre-June. A lot of his money is because of the proven performance escalators. So they bumped his 2022 salary up. So I don't think it matters whether it's pre or post with in terms of Slayton. But as you said, I still think there's talent with Darius Slayton. I just think is that talent worth $2.5 million when you're cap strapped? I think that if the Giants feel like they can get adequate play, we're talking about 5th wide receiver play. We're talking about special teams play at this point. If they can get that kind of play from somewhere else, I think it's hard to pay $2.5 million for it.
Well, Sterling Shepard being unhealthy, presumably, because of the injury that he suffered, if he might not be available for week 1, that bodes in the direction for Darius Slayton. Mm-hmm. But I think that the Giants, in this yet another really deep receiver class, probably going to invest at least some sort of asset in the draft into the wide receiver position, which could ultimately lead to Darius Slayton being released.
All right, Nick, I'm going to bang the table right now. I'm banging the table, and I'm going to give you one name. Late day 2, early day 3. Give me George Pickens. Give me George Pickens all day long.
I don't know if Pickens is going to be around then, but again, it is a deep wide receiver class. So that's an interesting one. And him and Kenny Golladay on the field with each other, that would be really cool. You got 2 trees out there running routes for you, just plucking balls out of the air.
So who's your guy? Who's your guy at that point in the draft?
So if we're
looking, don't you have one yet?
I mean, there's a bunch of guys that I like at the wide receiver position. I haven't gotten to Sky Moore's film yet, but I liked what I saw from him at the combine, and I like the highlights that I've seen. But I don't want to think about him just off of that. So I have to kind of get into his film. One name that is interesting to me, and I don't know where he's going to go, is John Mechie. Like, I feel like people are forgetting about John Mechie because he tore his ACL at Alabama, similar to Jameson Williams. But Jameson Williams was like all the talk in 2021, how great Jameson Williams was. And it's easy to see. The guy has like Jalen Waddle type of speed, takes top off the defense, going to be a first-round pick despite the fact that he tore his ACL in January. But I don't really hear a lot about Mechie. And if Mechie's around, late day 2, that's a guy that I would bring in because that's a guy who's going to do dirty work for you. He's going to be a chain mover. He's pretty solid route runner. I would say his hands could use a little bit of work, but I think he could come in and be a wide receiver 2 on your team and allow Kadarius Toney to be Kadarius Toney. And I think that's somebody that should be healthy by the start of the season, but you could get him at a value because of that injury.
Interesting, and we'll have to see what happens on day 2 of free agency. I think I think the Glowinski signing might well be the Giants' big splash for free agency, if that even qualifies as a big splash. But Giants fans, I think you should feel much better about the state of your offensive line. Please remember to stay with Big Blue View on all of the different platforms. You can find us on YouTube. You can find us on all of your favorite podcast applications, our website, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. We're everywhere. You can't get away from us, Nick. They can't get away from us. They shouldn't be able to get away from us. I don't know why they'd ever want to get away from us. I don't understand.
Why would they want to? No idea.
Why would they want to? I have no idea. All right, Giants fans, subscribe on YouTube, subscribe on your favorite podcast application. Thank you as always for listening, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.